Hello, my name is Jose Luis Andrade-Hernandez, and I'm recording this video. I'll be interviewing my professor, Carolyn Dunn. Say hi.
Hello.
Yes. So I decided on Carolyn Dunn. She's my professor for Intro to Playwriting, and I'm doing this video for my Peace and Conflict Resolution class.
Okay. Good. Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool class. I enjoy it. So I wanted to ask you some questions. It'll be a quick interview, just get
That's okay.
the good meat. I wanted to ask some questions on how you implement positive peace in our communities on like a daily basis.
On a daily basis.
That's not the question, but that's like the main focus.
Okay.
So the first question is, what's your name
Carolyn Dunn.
and what's your profession?
I am associate professor in the Department of Theater and Dance, and I'm a playwright and a poet and a dramaturg and an actor and a director and a producer.
Oh, okay. And then the second question is, could you describe your profession, like your main ones? I would say.
Well, oh my gosh, it's
because you do have a lot.
I do a lot. So the work, mostly the work that I do in terms of in terms of my job here as a professor in our department, is that my job was advertised to be somebody who does playwriting at the intersection of like social justice. And so most of my plays are always, there's a message, there's societal change. It's the plays are about conflict, not necessarily between individuals, but conflict in the community. So you know how when we talk about protagonists, antagonists, remember that conversation we had yesterday about, especially in Western drama structures, that there is a protagonist and an antagonist, and they're people and they're in conflict with one another. So in my plays, there really isn't so much conflict between the people, but there's conflict within the community or conflict within the family, and there's not really one protagonist, one antagonist. It's much more about the community and how the people in the community deal with the conflict, with one another. And there's internal conflict, there's external conflict. So it's a lot more about outside forces being in conflict with the internal lives of the characters. So that's and really I think that's like a function, especially in playwrights of color. So I am Indigenous, and so I tend to write more from that perspective, right? So from that aesthetic. So the aesthetic in Indigenous theater, and this is a generalization also, but that's much more of the aesthetic, that it's not necessarily conflict between individuals, but it's outside forces that impose conflict on a community or on a person, and that's where the conflict comes from. And I tend to write plays that really have that message, where there's peace and love. I feel like Ringo Starr, peace and love. Peace and
love.
But that's kind of where I come from. And I teach, when I teach playwriting, the plays that we read are very much mostly by playwrights of color, and in which there is a lot of that type of aesthetic, where there may be conflict between people in a Western dramaturgical structure, but for the most part, that there's a social justice or a racial justice or an equity justice component to the plays that I teach also. So we can learn and we can look at how we can affect societal change through theater and through performance. And so those are the plays that I tend to teach, and the plays I tend to write, and the work that I do in the department. But I also have, for a very long time, done equity, inclusion, and diversity work. So that's also, I used to be a chief diversity officer at a Midwestern university that shall remain nameless. And that was not a good fit, because I was asked basically to resign.
Ooh.
Because I was too radical for
okay.
them, and and trying to get them to anyway, it just it just wasn't a good fit. Trying to get them to look at social justice as a way of entering into dialogue on how to make the world a better place.
Ooh,
that community just wasn't ready for it.
Right.
You know, that it was a community that still had a long way to go and a lot of work to do. And some of them just weren't interested in doing that work.
Right.
So it didn't work out.
Yeah.
And I still kind of have some PTSD from it.
Oh, okay.
But it didn't really work out. So I've always had kind of that element of social justice praxis in the work that I do. And then I also come to the work through excuse me, through a decolonial lens. So understanding the way in which power structures have been set up to colonize people and to colonize communities. And so the work that I do is really about equity and justice in terms of decolonization and using art as a way of decolonizing or re-indigenizing a space in which indigenous knowledge systems are preferred over Western knowledge systems.
So you're trying to like be more diverse, right?
Yeah, trying to be more diverse or trying to be more equitable. And you know, and the difference between like equality and equity. I don't know if you've ever seen that. There's a cartoon that that there's a family and they're they're all different. Like the kids are young and there's like an older kid and there's a parent and under the slide that says equality, it's and they're watching a baseball game, but there's a big fence, right? So there's a huge fence.
Yeah, I have seen
and
this.
So
yes.
and so they so equality is everybody gets
the same
a stand that's the same size.
Yeah.
But the kids, because they're smaller
they
can't look over but the parents can because they're taller, right? And then the next slide is equity. And the platforms are differut sizes, so everybody has the view.
That's a good example.
So that's what I talk about a lot, is the difference between equality and equity. Right. Okay. There is a big difference.
Oh, okay, that was a good answer. Okay, I love that. Okay. So question 3, how did you, this sounds a little, like the question itself isn't supposed to be like offensive. It just sounded offensive to me, but it says, how did you end up working in this profession?
How did I end up working in this profession?
Yeah.
Well, I was raised by parents who also shared this, the social justice ideal. My mom was a teacher, and all of her career, for probably like the first 30 years of her career, was working in economically and racially disadvantaged communities. So she worked in a lot of people of color, poor communities, especially because she grew up in Watts, and she grew up in Watts, and that was like before it was Watts, when it had like that reputation as being like a bad neighborhood. And it was a very multicultural neighborhood when they were growing up, and we were a very multicultural family. So there was like everybody in our family, and that's because my mom's family was Creole from Louisiana, and which basically means that we were white, French, Indian, American Indian, Ishak, and Tunica Biloxi, and African American, and our families had been racially mixing for since colonization, and even before that our tribes were intermixed with each other.
Right. Okay.
So it's just sort of there's that aspect of when you grow up in a family that everybody is a different race, or everybody is a different ethnicity, there's you accept everyone. And it's just sort of like, oh yeah, well, my godfather, who was my cousin, was Filipino. You know, so we had, you know, so I have a Filipino godfather. My aunt who helped raise me was Japanese American.
Oh, that's so cool.
So I had a Japanese American aunt, and so Japanese American internment during World War II was part of our family's experience, even though I am not necessarily Japanese American. I was raised by this woman who was, and that was part of her experience. Wow, okay. And so that was part of our family's story.
Right, okay.
Which is not to say, you know, I wasn't there, I didn't experience it, but my aunt, who I loved, who was my family, experienced that. And you know, we all interviewed her over different periods of time to talk about what that was like. So that's part of the family story.
Okay.
And I did her, you know, she just passed away this year, and I did her eulogy, and I talked about that. I talked about her experience as a very small girl, being interred with her family, and it, you know, it's a powerful story. Someday I hope to like publish that, you know, to tell that
like
story.
The books, yeah.
But so that was, you know, so that's who I was raised by. And then my mom and her sister and her cousin, my uncle, who was my aunt's husband, they were raised in this very strong Creole community that had all of these traditions, that had, you know, a very Louisiana-centric tradition. And so, you know, so they were very religious, you know, we're Catholic, and the elders all spoke Louisiana French. They did, you know, the English was their second language, but when they moved to California, and Louisiana French is a mixture of, you know, of colonial French, of native language, specifically Mobilian, Choctaw, you know, because there was a lot of Choctaws in Louisiana, and we're also, we have Choctaw in our family. And then African words, you know, that entered into that language. So that language it's a very unique language that comes out of that particular place, that comes out of Louisiana. So I don't know where I was going with that, but that was their culture growing up, and their culture always was very much strands of different cultures that came into the family. If you know, think about like weaving a basket, you know, for example. So you have the basket, and then you're weaving all of these different colors, all of these cultures, all of these traditions into it. So in addition to the family that took up, like, you know, 2 city blocks of the, you know, all of the houses they were all related to each other, there was also a very diverse community that, you know, there were, you know, there was a large Mexican American community there. There was large Jewish community there. There were white people that lived in that community, you know, and in addition to, you know, there was a Japanese American family that lived in that community. So they all grew up, and it was very much one of those, it takes a village, you know, to raise kids.
Right.
So all those kids, like my mom's generation, all like ran around together in a pack, and most, you know, they were mostly first cousins with each other, but they all kind of, you know, ran around, and the parents in the neighborhood took care of everybody, you know, so, and looked out for. So again, being, you know, so think about it, you know, that's how they would raise children in tribal communities. So they brought that sensibility with them. So it's a very like tribalized,
that's cool,
you know,
though.
like I said, like everybody, you know, the adults all help raise all of the kids. And so you get that, again, that real sense of community. That's the first time I've ever thought about it, you know, in that way, that they brought that way of raising children with them to California when they came here. So, you know, and then, you know, my dad's family was very much, you know, my dad's family was also mixed race. They were, you know, black natives. They weren't Creole specifically from that part of Louisiana. They were from like the northern part of Louisiana, Mississippi, and so they, you know, were, I think that my dad's family really, you know, he was raised more African American, you know, and so his family, but still having that understanding of, yes, we're also white, yes, we're also native, and we're black. I mean, we are a mixed family, but I think that my dad's family, really saw themselves more as a mixed race African American family or a black family. Even Negro, that's what they were called back then. But Negro, black, African American, we still kind of intersperse that. So I think that my dad's family, so they were really, and they weren't like Catholic, so they were Baptist, they were Pentecostal, they were that kind, that tradition that also comes from, from Southern black traditions, Southern Native traditions, Southern white traditions, so they really kind of came out of that. And out of that tradition. But how I was raised and how my sister was raised by our parents, we were much more raised with the Creole culture from Louisiana, very specifically, which was all about very much a tribal community. The fact that my grandparents were we have that traceable lineage to our African ancestors, our American Indian ancestors, our what they call, now they're called Cajun, but we were Acadian back then, which is something different than what people think of as Cajun. I say that in scatter quotes now, but they were the real Acadians that came, that were kicked out of Canada after after how many French revolutions. Oh my gosh. So they were kicked out of kicked out of France into Canada, intermarried with the Algonquin, Mi'kmaq, Métis communities in that part of Canada. And then, really were mixed and were there for a couple hundred years. Then they get kicked out of Canada because the, Canadian government also turns more toward English ways of governing. And they have all these mixed race, French, Canadian, Indian people.
So many
that they
races.
Were like, that they were like, no, you gotta go. So then they kicked them out of Canada, Port Royal, Nova Scotia. We have some Quebecois, so kicked out of that area, and then they go down the Mississippi River into Louisiana, and then they settle there as its own unique culture, and then they start doing what they did in Canada. They intermarried with the natives, they intermarried with blacks, and some Cajuns will argue and say, oh, well, we're not black. I'm all, yeah, you are.
But they have some in there.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because we know, hello. So anyway, so I mean, and I'm telling you all of this because this is how, that we were raised in terms of seeing people, through that cultural lens of that, of equity and not equality. Again, of what I was saying. So, I mean, I think about, so like I was saying, my mom ended up going back to, and teaching in Watts for years, and then she became an administrator, and then she was a principal, and all of the schools that she was a principal were all schools in South Central. And so, and I used to go to summer school to her schools when I was little, and so I was surrounded by, by
school,
that community. Right.
And that's what you wanted
and
to
so,
do?
Yeah. And so just having that sense, and then my dad was, for many years, a juvenile probation officer, and then became an adult probation officer. And I know a lot of people go, oh, probation officer, and I'm all, well, my dad was, he was a sociologist and a social worker, and that's, the kind of work that he went into. He worked for the county. He was a probation supervisor when he passed. So my parents instilled in both my sister and me and my cousins and our larger community, really instilled that sense of equity, justice, and the idea that we have to work towards societal change and social change to make the world a better place.
Ooh,
so I was raised with that. I didn't just, like wake up one day and say,
we need peace.
We need peace, right? We need justice.
Okay.
I grew up with that. And so I grew up, really, and I don't want to say being radicalized, but compared to everybody else in the neighborhood, we were the radical social justice family. And I mean, we, my parents, my sister, me, my aunt and uncle and my cousins lived up the street. My other aunt lived on the other side of the neighborhood, and we were only like one of three families. Well, I count my cousins and us as one, but one of only three families of color in the neighborhood growing up. And I grew up in a bougie area, so I come from a place of privilege.
Right. Okay.
But my parents were first generation college students. So how we have a lot of folks here now who are first gen.
Right.
My parents were first gen. And so I reaped the benefit of my parents having college degrees. My dad didn't finish his degree until I was, I want to say like 9 or 10. But my mom, got her master's when she was pregnant with me.
Wow.
So I like to think
impressive.
that, so I like to think that that maybe her being in grad school when she was pregnant with me influenced me in wanting to go into education.
School. Wow, okay.
And it might, who knows?
Yeah.
We don't know. So I feel like yes, I was exposed to that. And then my dad went here to Cal State LA.
Oh.
Yeah, so he went here when I was in elementary school, and then he got his master's at Pepperdine. And his master's was in public administration. So again, my parents both had very social justice degrees, very social. My mom's master's was in education. So again, both of them having graduate degrees in service areas, in education, in public administration.
That's so cool.
In my dad, he was a sociology major, in college, and I was young. I remember when my dad was in college. And he worked full time, and then
still got classes,
still came and still finished, and still got and within like a period of 4 years, still got his
degree,
bachelor's degree, his master's degree. So like I said, but the fact that both of my parents had advanced degrees made me want to do that. And my uncle had his EDD, and and I want to say I was like maybe 5 or 6 when my uncle got his doctorate.
Wow.
And that inspired me. Like at the age of 5 or 6, I was like, I want to get my doctorate, like my uncle.
All right. You did mention that.
And so our so again, like my family background, and even though and it was like I was telling you guys the other day too, that how we when you watch movies about Thanksgiving or Christmas and families fighting and feeling like, oh God, I have to go sit with Uncle so and so and listen to him. That was not our experience. We loved being together.
Right.
We were a family, and even though we were dysfunctional in our own way, we loved being together.
Yeah.
We would sit at the dinner table, and my uncle would tell stories and fight with my mom and my aunt, and every time my mom was like this, my uncle was the comedian, and my mom was like the straight person, to the comedian.
Yeah.
And they would always fight, and she would take the bait every single time, and it would be like,
really?
And he loved, but that was like them growing up. And then my aunt, my mom's sister, always the mediator. So even though that, my mom and my aunt were my uncles, they were first cousins to each other. They were raised as siblings. They were raised all together, and they were very, very close. So they were raised as siblings. I consider, and I was raised with my cousins, and they're like my brothers, so we were, and unfortunately our kids, because I've moved around so much in my life, our kids weren't able to grow up together, which and it makes us, all of us, kind of sad that we don't, that we weren't able to have that experience bond, or that closeness
bond. But
we try to get to, now that
We're
that
adults.
I'm back here and my daughters are adults and my cousin's kids are all adults. We're hoping to be able to rectify that. But since I've been back for 2.5 years, my cousins and I see, we try to see each other like once a month.
Cool. Oh, that's so cool.
So we try to still, anyway. So I'm just like, because I love my family. So
your family had a big influence.
My family had huge influence in the work that I do.
Yes.
And really the work that my cousins do. 2 of them are well, one's retired now, a retired detective, and the other one is an LAPD detective, and then the youngest one is like a program director. He does nonprofit work with youth at the YMCA. Okay. So again, in these professions, even though my cousins are police officers, they are very much liberal police officers, which you don't see a lot. And they also are very much pro-community police officers, pro-community policing. And that's a whole other conversation that we could have.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. And question number 4, describe what your normal workday looks like. How does or is it different every day?
It is different every
day. Okay.
Well, because so I have my main job, which is to be your professor. Right.
Profession.
But I try to incorporate social justice work into that. And when you've seen kind of conversations that we've had in class, the kind of plays that we read, the kind of plays that everybody's writing. So you've seen that, and so and then I have my administrative work that I'm doing. So right now I am the acting program chair for American Indian and Indigenous Studies. So I'm kind of on loan to the College of Ethnic Studies to help get this program developed in this brand new American Indian and Indigenous Studies program. Because I have degrees in American Indian Studies. I also am an Indigenous person, part Native. But I don't see it as part. I see that as kind of it's who I am, right? And so I've always done academic as well as community work with Indigenous communities, right? So I have that aspect. So trying to develop this program that meets the needs of the students in the community, and then I also advise the American Indian student group on campus, which I used to do at Humboldt when I was faculty there. I was a student when I was very young in the same organization that I later advised as faculty when I went back to teach at Humboldt. So I've always, and I've worked at a couple different Indian education programs over the years. So very actively involved in, in communities, but around education and social justice. So a typical day for me is I wake up in the morning, I panic, and I go, "What am I doing today?"
I get that same feeling right now. I get the same feeling.
And then I also I used to have a side job, but that's there's a lot that's going on with that side job as an advisor for an MFA program that has a decolonial arts praxis, which means we infuse decolonial arts, indigeneity into the arts, it's much more of an arts program that an MFA program within the arts, and that can be visual arts, it can be performing arts, it can be photography, any of the fine arts, right? Dance, all of that. But we infuse a decolonial arts praxis, which is about justice, which is about looking to Indigenous communities for guidance on how to be in the world. And so I was a program director for that program for a long time, and then faculty for a long time. And unfortunately, the university is going through some stuff that it's gotten away from the principles of that program. And so what I'm hoping to do is be able to take some of those principles and be able to build those into the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program here on campus. That really privileges American Indians, specifically Southern California American Indians, as well as global Indigenous folks. So We have that very large Oaxacan, Zapotec, Purepecha, and other tribes, community here in Los Angeles. So really engaging with those communities also about how their indigeneity occurs in their everyday lives, and so really decolonizing that, and through education. Right. So talking about the indigenous experience. We have two new faculty coming in. One is from that was born and raised in Los Angeles, but her family is all from Oaxaca, and she's and I want to say she's she's Zapoteca. And so, but again, raised in the language, raised in the culture, which is not, and it reminds me a lot of French Louisiana, about how we're not really white. Right. In French Louisiana, we're not really
your family,
but we're very our family. I mean, and the culture in French Louisiana is very much its own, its own subset of cultures in Louisiana. There's a very strong French presence in Louisiana that the American government tried to get rid of by outlawing the speaking of. I mean, very similarly to what was done to indigenous languages, like don't speak it. My grandparents moved here, and they didn't teach their kids how to speak that, that language. Again, you see that in a lot of Latinx families that, of the same generation of my parents that come to California, and suddenly nobody speaks Spanish anymore. That Spanish is very much not, Castilian Spanish from Spain, but it's Spanish that's located specifically within a land base that has a lot of indigenous. So there's a lot of Nahuatl words, there's a lot of Mayan words in Spanish from Mexico. There's a lot of, Zapotec words that are used. So there's a lot of, so it's very much influenced, and then African words too, because there's a lot of African representation, Afro-Latino, Afro-Indigenous representation in Mexico and Central, and but Mexico is considered North America, but whatever.
That's a different topic.
The Americas, that's a whole different topic there too. But again, so and you see that where the families came here, and it was that generation. Right. And now I feel like my generation is trying to do, and even the generation before me is still working toward language restoration, whether it's hard. It's in, non-colonial, it's in so-called, contemporary Mexican Spanish, or, Louisiana French, or even the indigenous languages. And I also speak a little bit of Choctaw, and that's one of our indigenous. I'm learning Ishak, I'm learning Tunica, which are our other ancestral languages, or I should say Ishakoi is how you say the language. So I'm learning a little bit in that, and then teaching my children. Their dad, Choctaw was his first language. Right, okay. But we, and it wasn't like something that we purposely set out to do. Like I think my grandparents were like, we're not speaking. It just, we're in survival mode, so we were just speaking English. And so now, I'm in the process of helping my kids learn how to speak Choctaw.
Oh, okay.
So, and also I know some Choctaw.
Right, okay.
I know like how to introduce myself. I know a lot of words. It's so funny because I would sit there and go, I really don't. And I go, well, I guess I do know a lot. I just don't know grammar, but I know a lot of words in Choctaw. And so I try with my kids to, encourage them to do that.
That's really good. Wow. Oh, yeah, and you're also a mother.
Also a mom of adult children your age.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids. My son is 27, and my daughters are 22 and 20.
Oh, I'll add that in there. So not only you have a profession, you're also a mother.
Yeah, and I was a single mom for a long time. So, Okay. So, and raising them on my own completely, and, financially, too.
Right. Amen. Amen. You're doing a great job.
And I would never say anything publicly negative about their dad.
Man, that's good. So, right. Let's keep it positive.
The issues were between us, not of public consumption.
Right.
I don't know if he'd say the same thing.
No. Men are right. Number 5. Question number 5. What is your definition of positive peace?
Peace and love. You cannot work for peace without having love. And I think that it's like the concept of agape, right? So, and I don't know if that's something that you're aware of, but it's a biblical term. Right. It comes out of, agape is the Greek word for, there's different forms of love, right? English is so limiting. We don't have a way of talking about different types of love. But agape is the type of love that you have for your community and the world and your brethren and your brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters in like the sense of you're the the universal family, right? And so I think that we cannot have peace without having love, and we cannot have peace without having any type of of negotiation. And I think that because of colonization, we are so accustomed to fighting with each other and learning how it's like they were very good. The English, the Spanish, and to some sense the French. I gotta claim those guys too. Okay. Even though I like to think the French were a little more sneaky about how they did it. There was a lot more intermarrying, with the French than there was with the Spanish, and a lot more rape. Let's say on the English and Spanish side. Not to say that there wasn't rape on the French. That's a whole other conversation that we could have. But to do things with love, and I think that is because I and I'm also, and honestly, I'm also a Catholic. I'm still a Catholic, even though a lot of people leave very early, leave the church. I was gone for a while, but I always came back. And I really kind of follow liberation theology in the sense that which is also about social justice and equity, and it's about making the world a better place, not just for me personally, but for everyone around me. That I have to do what I need to do in order to make it better, not just for me or my children, but I want to make it better for my community. And then it ripples outward. So I think, and I think that's, we've been so trained by colonization to think that if we get, the proverbial so think of it, you've heard the pie before. Yes. Everybody gets their own little piece of the pie. And then, but if I get, my piece of the pie, then that means, someone else will look at that and say, well, you got your piece of the pie. If you get a piece, there won't be any left for me. And my response to that is, well, if we put all of our pieces together, we all have a whole pie. Exactly. That's a good way of looking at that. And so to look at it that way, to stop thinking about, if somebody gets something that I don't have, I'm left without. But what does what do you bring to the table with, your section of the pie? Like, what do you bring? Let's put it all, I'm sorry, call me a communist, whatever. Let's bring it all together and see how we can, do this, work for the betterment of society. So everyone is included. So no one is excluded. And I know that's it's hard. It's utopian. It's so hard. Way to think about, but it's utopian from a tribal perspective, an indigenous perspective as a colonized person. And because I do everything with love, right? Do everything with love, and rather than a sense of without. And I think that's, where we are in the world. We have, we're in these moments where people feel as though they haven't been recognized or given, their, what they think is theirs.
Right.
But it really, is it really theirs to begin with, or is it ours?
Right.
To look at. And I think that's why we have, so many, especially, so many wars going on right now. Especially wars, that at instead of talking about how different the religions are, let's talk about how similar they are.
We're all just humans.
And we all have flood stories.
Yeah.
We all have creation stories. We all have stories that we can learn from. And if you think about it, and if you look at all of the creation stories throughout the world, it's basically the same thing. On the surface. I mean, there's cultural aspects that have been woven in over the years, but we all have the same intrinsic creation stories and stories of having to start over again, like after the Great Flood. Having to start over again, having to, figure out how to remake our world. Right. Some of us have just been better at it, and some of us have been really bad at it. And unfortunately, it's, there's still that, that conflict.
All right. And question number 6 is so in my class, it's I mentioned, it's peace and conflict class. We have defined like our definition of is positive peace as like attitudes. It's like it's institutions and structures that we have created, and so we can sustain peaceful societies. And I want your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that like I said, to decolonize, because colonization is about conquest and dehumanization. Yeah. And it's about land, right? So if I, come here and my God, right? My, the person that I follow has said to me through his human, and I say his in scatter quotes because, we know there are different interpretations. Right. So God has said, this, I give you the right to take over and conquer land in my name. Then I take that and I go to this place and I see these people who are already here. And in order for me to subjugate those people, they have to be seen as not human. They're animals. And so that's where you see when colonization happens, there's the dehumanization. There is that. Of the indigenous people. Look at what's going on right now in Israel, in Gaza.
Yeah, right now the
there's this great, great dehumanization of Palestinians, right? Because but which is not to say that what happened in the murders and the kidnappings and the horrible things that happened to the kibbutzim, to the people, for the people who lived, they're the radicals, they're the peacemakers, they're the people that are out there living this radical ideal of peace and justice. So for the folks who went in and murdered them, that's like their best chance of ever achieving a peaceful society. They, I feel like the wrong people were murdered.
Absolutely,
But then that gets into the whole idea of conquering, subjugation. Subjugating the other, the inhuman, and you can do all of these atrocities to other people as long as you don't see them as people. Correct. Like I said, if you see them as animals, if you see them as non-human, you see them, it's easier to mistreat them. It's easier to kill them. It's easier to enslave them. It's easier to to get rid of them in whatever way that means if you don't see them as human beings. And I think that's what's happening. And then you have like these right-wing governments that also, follow that colonization practice. And then are committing atrocities against people, on a daily basis. And then suddenly there's pushback on it. But unfortunately, the people who were the ones that, the Israelis who were murdered in the beginning of October were the Israelis who are very pro-Palestinian, who are very pro, hey, we're all here together, let's figure out how to work together. Let's figure out how to do this together. So, and unfortunately, then you have these right-wing governments or these right-wing power structures that jump into the fray and are able to control that narrative and make it seem, to justify, these human rights violations. Just because somebody, like I said, somebody went in and what they did was horrible, murdered and kidnapped those people. That was horrible. But at the same time, Palestinians have been murdered and kidnapped and violated in so many ways that these people saw no other recourse other than to revert to terrorism. And so like I said, I'm pro peace. I'm not pro Israel, pro Palestine. I'm triggered because of the colonial practices practiced by Zionist and right-wing governments, because it reminds me of what happened here in that whole in our history, the whole settler colonial narrative, because of those practices, and it's because of those practices that we are in the situation that we're in right now, and years upon years, like the last, 80, 70 years of Israel's existence, that we are in this position that we are in. And anyway, I feel like I kind of went off on that, on that whole topic. But the thing is that peace is possible, but people have to break down those colonial barriers and find a win-win solution for everyone. Our American and Western justice system, there's winners and there's losers. In the indigenous one, in general, there's payment made, there's reciprocity, there's restoration that's done. So it's not just, you killed my neighbor, so you're going to jail for the rest of your life. So you're making payment for it. Payment in that system is very different. Reciprocity and restoration is, okay, you killed my child, give me one of your children. That's so reciprocity. Bad. I mean, and that's radical, right? That's like, what? I mean, but in the truest form of reciprocity and restoration, it's like restorative justice. So not only is it individuals who have been killing each other, it's restoration to the entire community. So people who came from the same communities who killed each other's family members or were horrible, whatever happened, they have to make payment not only to one another, but to the entire community, because they've injured the entire community with their conflict. And so restorative justice is about going in and making those changes so this never happens again. And so everyone, and it takes a lot of work. It's not easy. And it takes years. But, but we're too busy in being invested in this system of winners and losers. Having the pie, not having the pie. An eye for an eye. That's true. Kind of thing.
That's true.
So what else are you going to do for to restore peace in the community that you've disrupted.
Yeah.
You got to own it. You got to take responsibility for your actions. First of all, that's the first part of it. And nobody is going to take responsibility for their actions because that's an admission that they could have done something wrong. Right?
Yeah.
And I've tried to raise my children to own their shit. To own the things that you've done,
right? And
to say, and I try to be that example to them and say, oh, okay, I fucked up, or I, now I say that because they're adults, but
right.
I used to say I messed up. I messed up. I messed up, and I'm sorry, and I should not have, and I apologize. What can I do to make this better for you? And like I said, that means just owning your failings, because we're all human beings.
Right.
You've said that. How many times, Jorge, have you said that in this conversation?
So many times.
We're all human beings, right? And we're all human beings. We make mistakes.
We're not perfect.
We're not perfect. We do things, in the moment. But if I can recognize that I do things in the moment and then maybe stop myself from doing that again, then I've learned something. Then I've learned how to change that behavior. And we have to be able to, as a society, get to that point where we say,
we own up to our own mistakes.
Own up to our failings. Yeah. What can we do to make it better? Yeah, well, give me my land back, first of all. That would, right. You may not be able to give me my entire land, but what portion is available that you can say, yeah, you don't have to pay me. I'm going to give this back to you. Because it was stolen from you, and it was taken from you,
right?
In ways that weren't good. So, how do we? Again, that's restorative justice.
That's right.
It's it's making amends and honest amends, not just words,
talk,
but action behind it.
All right, so number 7, this is like our last question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, how do you believe your work, like what you do on a day-to-day basis, will impact the community, or how has it already impacted the community?
That's a good question. Well, in my work that I try to do, I try not to bring attention to myself.
Right. Okay.
So, for me, any attention that comes to me should be given to the community.
Ooh, okay.
And if people say things like, oh, you did, and I'm going to use this example. Okay, because this is on a very small scale, but think of it as a metaphor, right? Okay. So our department, we decided that we were going to build an altar for Dia de los Muertos on the quad
that was yesterday. That
right?
was awesome.
And so everybody in the department was like, oh, thank you, Profe and Carolyn, for building this and doing doing all of this work. And I'm like, listen, I said, I showed up at the last minute, but Profe had already put everything out and had decorated, and all I did was come in and take the photographs and decorate the photos and put the photos up, and then help sprinkle the marigolds on the ground. And so, and I publicly I said, I go, look, I wasn't me. I go, he did most of the work. I just came to support him. So you know what I mean? So like that's a metaphor of like, and because I don't want to take responsibility for something that I didn't do. That it was all him. He organized it. He put it together. I helped him. I supported him.
You're supporting. Right.
And so and you can take that metaphor there, that you lift up other people in the community. You thank them for the work that they've done. And everything I do, even with developing the, our American Indian and Indigenous Studies program is not so I can be up front and be vocal and be a figurehead. It's so I can establish something that's needed by the students, but establish for the students with other community members, with other faculty, with people from the local tribes, So it's not something that I'm doing this to bring attention to myself. I don't like that. I mean, believe it or not,
Yeah.
me talking, and looking the way I look and I really don't want to bring attention to myself.
Right.
My work is to bring attention to the community,
right.
and bring it, and uplift the community, rather than uplift myself.
Right. Okay.
Because that's not who I am.
Right.
I think about all of the problems, like even in Indian country right now, where so many people are trying to uplift themselves at the expense of someone else, because they've gotten away from that.
Right.
Gotten away from that sense of community, and a lot of those folks live outside of the community, so they don't have the community to tell them, you're not behaving how you should be behaving. And so, like I said, everything that I do, and it turns into a sense of selflessness.
Right.
What's best for the students? What's best for the community? What's best for other people other than myself? How do I look at the whole picture and say, okay, what is the best possible outcome for everybody, not just for one entity or another entity? How can we work together? So I'm very collaborative, and even as a playwright, I'm very collaborative in my approach. Even in providing opportunities for other people, providing anytime I go and have something that I do a play reading or I do something, I also want other people to be able to be part of that. So to open up opportunities for other people within the community, because it makes the community better. Right?
Okay.
It makes it a better place, to live, to work, to be, to raise families, to have all of that.
The community, right?
Yeah, because it's always going to be about the communal. It's always going to be about what's best for, when I say the nation, I mean tribal nation.
Right.
I mean the community. I mean the clan. The Iksa is how you say clan in Choctaw. So for the Iksa, what is what's the best for everybody, and what's best for the world around me. So I don't like to draw attention to myself.
Okay.
But I mean, we could talk about a ton of controversy even in that community.
Right.
With somebody who has always uplifted the community now being attacked for being, for being not who they say they are. Whatever. Because and that is a way for people who want to draw attention to themselves, want to sell books, want to be the one, that people go to. That's their motivation. It's not about community. It's about taking down other people so they can have the attention.
Right. Okay.
And I'm not that person. I don't want the attention or the spotlight. I want to be the attention and the spotlight to be on the community, to be on other people.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions I had, Carolyn. Oh my God, yeah. Thank you so much for doing this agreeing to this interview. And
those were really good questions. Right. And those, it's really,
it's like deep, right?
Yeah. And it makes me think about, like I said, about, and have such an appreciation for how my parents raised me, and how my family, how my aunts raised me, my grandmothers, my cousins, my uncles, how we were, how the community raised me.
Right. That's so cool.
I just, to be able to have that appreciation for being raised that way, in the right way.
Right. Amen. Well, thank you so much for getting open with me. You gave me some really great answers, and I got my interview. Yes.
Good. And now you're late for class.
Yeah. Well, it's fine. It doesn't matter. But thank you so much, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So welcome.
This ends the interview. Today's date is what's the date today?
Today is the 1st.
Oh, November 1st.
Or the 2nd?
So I interviewed on the November.
No, it's the 2nd.
November 2nd. November 2nd. All right. Well, yeah, that concludes the video.
Yay.